In 1961, in Roanoke, Virginia, a widow named Edith cooked supper in the smallest pot she owned. 1 potato, half an onion, a spoon of bacon grease she kept in a coffee can by the stove. The pot was small because the table was empty. Her husband had been gone 11 months. Her children were grown and scattered. She used to cook for 6. Now she stood at the stove and did the terrible arithmetic of 1. And here is the part nobody tells you. That little pot of potato and onion was not sad. It was clever. It was thrifty. It was the exact meal her own mother had made through the Depression. You look at a pot like that and you think, poor woman, poor supper. Think again. We like to believe the past was harder, sadder. We picture our grandparents eating gray, joyless food because they had nothing better. We tell ourselves progress rescued them. That is the comfortable story, and it is mostly wrong. The meals the old folks made when money was thin were not failures of cooking. They were the highest form of it. 1 pot, 1 burner, almost no money, almost no strength required. They fed a person eating alone at a table that used to seat a family and stretched a Social Security check across 30 long days. They were engineering, they were dignity, and most of them we have thrown clean away. If your mother or your grandmother ever made one of these, do me a kindness. Subscribe, so we don't lose the rest. Let me count them down, all 25. From the everyday to the one that carried families through. Number 25, tomato and bread soup. This was the meal that said, I have almost nothing left, and I am still going to eat well tonight. Half a loaf of stale bread, a can of tomatoes, a clove of garlic, and enough water to loosen it. You tore the bread in and simmered 20 minutes, till it dissolved into a thick porridge, warm and filling for almost nothing. Italian families brought it to the tenements of New York in the 40s. Modern chefs rediscovered it. They call it ribollita and charge $18 a bowl. Your grandmother called it supper. Number 24, potato and onion stew. If you grew up poor in Appalachia, you knew this one. 2 potatoes, 1 onion, a spoon of bacon grease, water, and salt. You sliced the potatoes thin and simmered till they broke apart, and thickened the broth into something creamy without a drop of cream. The bacon grease gave it a ghost of smoke. Potatoes cost pennies. Onions kept for weeks, and the whole thing could be made from a kitchen stool, never lifting anything heavier than a wooden spoon. Church ladies in West Virginia still carry it to homebound folks in mason jars. Number 23, ham bone and bean soup. Nothing went to waste in a house that understood hunger. When the ham was eaten to the bone became the next 3 suppers. Into a pot with navy beans soaked overnight, an onion, a couple carrots, and water. 3 or 4 hours till the beans turned creamy and pulled every bit of smoke off that bone, thick enough to stand a spoon in. A 1-pound bag of navy beans ran 69 cents in 1990 and fed a person near a week. The ham bone was free, already paid for on Sunday. That is not a recipe. That is arithmetic taught by mothers who never had the luxury of wasting a single thing. Number 22, cabbage and sausage pot. 1 head of cabbage, 2 or 3 smoked sausage links, a pot of water. That was the whole list. You quartered the cabbage, cut the sausage into thick coins, simmered 45 minutes. The cabbage turned silky and sweet. The sausage perfumed the pot with garlic and smoke. A head of cabbage cost less than $1 and fed a person 3 days. And here is what mattered for old hands. No knife work. You could tear the cabbage, Snap the sausage. No strength, no skill. Polish grandmothers in Chicago made it. German families in Wisconsin made it all winter. Poverty does not care where your people came from. Number 21, rice and canned chicken stew. When you could not get to the store, this is what you made: a can of chicken, a cup of rice, a can of cream of mushroom soup, water to thin it. Everything in one pot. 20 minutes to something that tasted like a simplified chicken and rice casserole. The chicken was already cooked, so no raw meat to fuss with. No worrying over temperature with unsteady hands. Open, dump, stir, and wait. Rural seniors miles from a grocery kept their pantries like a bunker. This meal needed not one fresh thing, not pretty, but it kept a body fed. Number 20, chili with beans. Not the Texas kind with hand-cut brisket, the poor man's kind. A pound of ground beef browned in a pot, a can of kidney beans, a can of tomatoes, chili powder, and salt. 30 minutes, and you had a pot that lasted 3 days and tasted better on day 2. For a senior cooking for one, this was the ultimate batch meal. Make it Sunday. Eat it Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Church food banks knew it by heart. They packed the ingredients in one bag because they knew exactly who would make it and exactly how far it would stretch. Number 19, egg drop soup. Your grandmother did not need a Chinese restaurant for this. She needed boiling broth, 2 eggs, and 60 seconds. She beat the eggs in a cup, then poured them into the boiling broth in a thin stream while stirring slow. They set instantly into silky golden ribbons, a pinch of salt, a dash of pepper. Done. This was the meal seniors made when they were sick, tired, or had no appetite, but knew they had to eat something. A carton of broth and a couple eggs. Less than $2, less than 5 minutes. For a person eating alone, it was a hug in a bowl. Number 18, stewed tomatoes and macaroni, the cheapest supper on this whole list. Under $1.50. A can of tomatoes, a handful of elbow macaroni, a pat of butter, salt, and pepper. You cooked the macaroni right in the tomatoes and a little water, so the pasta drank up all that color and tang. 10 minutes, 1 pot, nothing to wash but a spoon. Southern grandmothers made it as a side, but for a widow with $3 left before the check came, it was the whole meal. Sweet, soft, warm, and forgiving of tired hands. Now let me stop the list a moment, because here is where it gets personal. These are not just recipes. They are survival strategies, invented by people who had no one to lean on. A senior living alone faces something the cooking shows never mention: the loneliness of making food for one. These meals solved more than hunger. They solved energy. When you are 78 and your knees ache and washing 3 pans makes you want to skip supper, a 1-pot meal is the difference between eating and not eating. That is what they were built for. Not flavor, survival. Number 17, lentil and carrot stew. A cup of dried lentils, 2 carrots, an onion, a pot of water. That was the prescription depression mothers tucked into their daughters' recipe boxes. Lentils needed no soaking. 30 minutes, and they broke down into a thick, earthy porridge that stuck to your ribs. Less than $1, even in the 90s. Now they call lentils a superfood: protein, fiber, iron. Seniors who ate them without knowing any of that were doing better than folks spending 5 times as much on supplements. A widow in Missouri ate lentil stew 3 nights a week for 11 years after her husband died. Her doctor said her iron was perfect. Number 16, corn chowder, a can of creamed corn, a can of whole kernel corn, a diced potato, a cup of milk, the whole foundation of the cheapest, most satisfying chowder most Americans ever tasted, and forgot. You simmered the potato tender, added both cans and the milk, and let it turn golden and velvety. The creamed corn thickened itself. No roux, no lumps. Midwest farm wives made it when the freezer was empty and the garden was done. Canned corn kept for years. This meal waited on the shelf until you needed it. Number 15, black-eyed pea stew. In the South, black-eyed peas were not just New Year's luck. They were a Wednesday night lifeline. Dried peas simmered with a ham hock, an onion, and a can of tomatoes, till everything melted into a thick, smoky, tangy stew. The ham hock was the cheapest cut at the butcher, often under $1 a pound. It existed for one purpose, to give flavor to beans. Seniors in Alabama made it on the 1st of the month, when the check came in. One pot fed a person 4 or 5 days, over rice further still. This was not cuisine. This was engineering. Number 14, beef and macaroni pot, 1 pound of ground beef, 1 box of elbow macaroni, 1 can of tomato sauce, 1 pot. Brown the beef, drain the fat, add the macaroni and sauce and enough water to cook the pasta right in the same pot. 15 minutes to a supper that tasted like a stripped-down version of every casserole your mother made. The real genius was for a person eating alone. The leftovers reheated perfect and tasted better the second day. Most households just called it goulash, though it bore no resemblance to the Hungarian original. American poverty food wearing a borrowed name, and it kept millions fed. Now, here is something the food industry would rather you not sit with. These meals cost almost nothing because they use the things a grocery store cannot mark up. Dried beans, potatoes, onions, rice, cabbage. There is no advertising budget behind a head of cabbage. The foods that keep seniors alive and independent are the foods nobody can profit from. So instead, they sell frozen dinners at $4 each, with less nutrition than a bowl of bean soup that costs 35 cents. The economics are not complicated. They are just cruel. Number 13, chicken and dumplings. The backs, necks, and wings cost almost nothing. A senior bought a couple dollars of bony chicken parts, simmered them with celery and onion till the meat fell off, then dropped spoonfuls of biscuit dough into the broth. The dumplings puffed up soft and pillowy, drinking in the chicken flavor as they cooked. 20 minutes covered, and the pot was full of tender chicken, thick broth, and dumplings that melted on the tongue. This was what Southern grandmothers made when someone was grieving or sick. A single batch lasted near a week, and every warmed bowl said somebody still cared enough to cook for you. Number 12, split pea soup, a bag of split peas, a leftover ham bone, a carrot, and water. Nothing else. The peas dissolved into a thick green porridge after an hour, and the ham bone gave up every last trace of smoke. So dense you could almost cut it. Hospitals served it. Senior centers served it because it was cheap, nutritious, and near impossible to ruin. You could forget it on the stove and it would not burn. It would just get thicker. For a senior with memory troubles, that forgiveness mattered. A pot left on too long became tomorrow's lunch, not a disaster. Number 11, salmon patties and gravy, a can of salmon mashed with a cracker or two, an egg and a little onion, formed into patties and fried golden in one skillet. Then you moved the patties aside, sprinkled flour into the drippings, added milk, and stirred till the gravy thickened. Everything back in covered 5 more minutes. A can of salmon cost less than $2. 2 patties and gravy over rice. Fed a senior for 2 meals. And here is the bonus nobody knew. The calcium in those soft little salmon bones was exactly what aging bones needed. Your grandmother did not know the science. She just knew it was cheap and good and held together in the pan. Number 10, navy bean soup. If ham and bean soup was the Sunday version, navy bean soup was the weeknight workhorse. No bone required. Just a bag of dried navy beans, an onion, a couple stalks of celery, and salt. 2 hours till the beans burst and thickened the broth into a creamy white soup. A splash of vinegar at the end brightened the whole pot. The United States Senate cafeteria has served navy bean soup every single day since 1903. That is not an exaggeration, because it is cheap, filling, and every senator who grew up poor knows it as the taste of home. A 2-pound bag of beans cost $1.50 and made enough soup to last a week. Number 9, tuna noodle pot. A can of tuna, a handful of egg noodles, a can of cream of mushroom soup, and frozen peas if you had them. Everything in one pot with enough water to cook the noodles. 12 minutes, and the kitchen smelled like every Wednesday from 1955 to 1985. For a senior living alone, this was the meal you made with your eyes closed. Open, dump, stir. A widow in Nebraska added crushed potato chips on top. She said the crunch was the only thing that made her feel like she was eating a real dinner, not just surviving. Her neighbors started bringing chips, then their own bowls. It became Tuesday supper at Margie's house, a 1-pot meal that accidentally cured loneliness. Number 8, potato soup. 5 potatoes, 1 onion, butter, milk, and salt. That simple list fed more American families through hard times than almost anything here. You simmered the potatoes and onions soft, mashed some right in the pot to thicken it. Then a splash of milk and a pat of butter turned it creamy. 30 minutes, under $2. And for a senior, potato soup had one crucial advantage. It was soft, no chewing required. For someone with missing teeth or dentures that never fit right, this was the difference between a proper supper and giving up on food. The Depression generation could not afford dental care. They just quietly adapted their cooking until everything was soft enough to eat. Potato soup was the centerpiece of that. Now here is the thing nobody says out loud. Half the seniors in America who live alone skip meals, not because they forgot, because cooking for one feels pointless. The table is too quiet when there is no one across from you. These 1-pot meals were the answer to that silence, not because they were exciting, because they were possible. You could make them tired, sad, with aching hands and a bad back. They met you where you were. That was their genius. Not flavor, accessibility. The most important ingredient was never the beans or the broth. It was that someone could actually make it. Number 7, sausage and white bean stew. Smoked sausage in rounds. A can of white beans, drained. A can of diced tomatoes. A handful of spinach if you had it. 1 pot, 20 minutes. The sausage gave it smoke. The beans made it hearty. The tomatoes gave it brightness. And the spinach added iron most seniors weren't getting. This was the 1-pot meal that actually looked like a real dinner. And for a senior losing interest in eating, that mattered more than the nutrition facts. A meal that looks like a meal makes you feel like a person. Number 6, vegetable beef soup, a pound of stew meat. whatever vegetables were limping along in the crisper, a can of tomatoes, water. This was the clean out the fridge meal. Celery going limp, carrots getting soft, a potato starting to sprout. All of it into the pot. You browned the meat, piled everything on, and simmered an hour till the windows fogged. For a senior, this prevented food waste, which prevented that slow feeling of not being able to manage your own kitchen anymore, and no two pots ever tasted the same, which kept things interesting more than you'd think. Number 5, red beans and rice, a pound of red kidney beans, a smoked sausage link, an onion, a green pepper, a stalk of celery, cooked low and slow in one pot till the beans turned creamy and the sausage gave up its smoky soul, served over rice. This was the Monday meal of New Orleans, born from washing clothes all day while supper simmered on the back burner. For a senior, the beauty was exactly that, unattended. Put the pot on at noon, come back at 5. No stirring, no standing. And what came out was so rich you forgot you'd spent less than $3. Louis Armstrong signed his letters, "Red beans and rice yours." That was a man who never forgot where his food came from. Number 4, depression stew. A retired steelworker in Pittsburgh ate this every night for 3 years. His doctor said his blood work beat men half his age. Ground beef browned in a pot, a can of tomatoes, a can of corn, 2 diced potatoes, water, salt, pepper. That was it. The potatoes thickened it, the corn sweetened it, the tomatoes gave it acid. This showed up in depression cookbooks with no name, just stew. The recipe that said no matter how bad things get, you can eat tonight. A single pot lasted 4 days and cost less than $5. For a senior on Social Security, this stew was defiance. The quiet refusal to be beaten by a fixed income and an empty kitchen. Number 3, chicken thigh and rice pot. Chicken thighs were the forgotten cut. For decades, they cost half the price of breasts because Americans were convinced white meat was better. Seniors who knew better bought thighs at 69 cents a pound. You browned them, added a cup of rice, a can of broth, and whatever seasoning you had. Covered 30 minutes. The rice drank up every drop, and the thighs fell apart at a fork. The fat in the thighs was the whole secret. It kept the rice moist in a way skinless breast never could. For a senior with a dwindling appetite, that richness made the difference between pushing food around the plate and finishing a meal. That muscle memory supper that tasted like the kitchen was still alive. Number 2, pinto beans and cornbread. Not technically one pot, but the cornbread baked in the same cast iron skillet seasoned by 60 years of use. A bag of dried pintos cooked low 3 hours with a bit of salt pork, till the broth turned thick and brown and the beans creamy. The cornbread, golden and crackling, broken into chunks to soak up the bean liquor. Across the rural South, the Ozarks, the Plains, this was not a meal. It was the meal, the one that defined poverty cooking for 100 years. Pinto beans were the cheapest protein in the American grocery store, and they still are. A senior who kept pintos and cornmeal in the cupboard would never go hungry. Nothing to photograph, only a full belly and the knowledge that tomorrow you could do it again. Number 1, chicken soup. A whole chicken in a pot of water with carrots, celery, onion, and salt. Simmered 2 hours till the house smelled like somebody's grandmother lived there. The broth turned golden. The chicken fell apart. The most basic, most nourishing, most healing meal human beings ever invented. Every culture has a version. Every generation passes it down. For a senior living alone, a pot of chicken soup was so much more than nutrition. It was a connection to every person who had ever made it for them. Every sick day, every cold winter, every mother who stood at a stove and stirred, because stirring was a way of saying, "I love you," without the words. You could make it with almost nothing and stretch it for days. And every bowl carried the memory of a full house, even when the house was quiet now. That is why it is number one, not because it was fanciest, because it was the one that carried people through. So there they are. 25 suppers built out of almost nothing by people who refused to let a thin wallet mean an empty plate. If you want the cheapest, most forgiving ones again, go back to number 8, the potato soup, and number 4, the depression stew, and number 1, always number 1. Now let me ask you something, and I truly want to know. Which one of these did your family make? Which pot simmered on your grandmother's stove? Tell me down below, and who cooked it, so the rest of us can remember too. And if any of this stirred something in you, subscribe and sit with me again next time, because a recipe only dies when the last person who remembers it stops telling it. And tonight, that person is you.